Welcome to Finding Fuscata. I'm Shawn. Have you ever heard the expression, what you want wants you, or maybe you've heard what you're looking for is looking for you, or maybe you've heard, if you move closer to God, he'll move closer to you. In this episode, I'm going to demonstrate to you that that isn't just a New Age principle or some Christian theology or anything like that, but it's actually part of the evolutionary process. And it's a law that anybody can use to completely change their life. So if you like that, stick around and we'll unpack it together. There's a principle that I call submitting to and becoming I am. I first came across this idea in the summer of 2009 when I was in Iraq on a convoy with my Iraqi translator. And it was Ramadan at the time, and I had questions for him. I was a born-again Christian and Bible believer, and he was a devout Muslim. And we talked for several hours throughout the day. And each one of us, because of our faith, were subtly trying to convert the other. I was still an evangelical, and I saw it as my God-given duty to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ and to, convert this non-believer to the faith. And then, he as a devout Muslim saw it as his duty also to, to show me the way of Islam and have me, submit to Allah and the Quran. And fair enough. So the conversation kind of went like that. But one of the things that struck me during the conversation was how often he talked about having answers to prayer. Which seemed strange to me because at the time I believed that only Christians had answers to prayer and everybody else was delusional or praying to a false god or something like that. And I couldn't conceptualize that somebody from another faith could see that they were getting answers to prayer. And this really bothered me. So I brought it up to my father, who's a sort of an amateur theologian, and he has the greatest theological knowledge of anybody that I know. I also brought it up to my pastor and some other Bible teachers that I knew. And the answer that I got unanimously was, well, you'll hear Muslims say that, but they only think that they're getting answers to prayer. They're not really getting answers to prayer. And at the time, my faith was already kind of teetering because that conversation had been so impactful. But when I heard that, I started to think, maybe Christians just don't have a corner on this market at all. Maybe this whole idea that, we have the only pathway to God and it's through Jesus Christ and through our particular version of, the Bible and the church or whatever, maybe that's just not true. And that started me down a path of becoming an atheist and getting into New Age and getting into Eastern religions and all kinds of stuff. But I never let go of the idea that he, our translator, sincerely believed that he had answered prayers. And I had known pastors and I had had my own experiences and, my father and friends and family and so many people in their lives who had talked about having answers to prayers and had seen these things happen. But the fact that it wasn't just Christians, and it happened to Muslims, and it happened to Catholics, and it happened to Buddhists, and it happened to atheists, it happened to everybody, indicated to me that there must be a larger principle at work. So I started looking for it. And what I found is the thing that I call submission to and becoming I am. Now, while I'm explaining this to you, I will use some Christian language and some New Age language, and I'll put in a dabble of science and whatnot, because those are the things that I understand. But I would like you to hear this and have your own experience, and then take this principle and experiment with it in your own life and see how you can apply it and see how it starts to change your life. One of the first things I'd like you to think about when trying to understand this idea is this phenomena that we've all seen. And it's when a certain idea is, it seems like an idea is just ready to come to fruition. It's ready to become a real thing in the world. And we see it throughout history. Probably one of the most famous events is during the early 1900s when Albert Einstein and all of his contemporaries and colleagues were making these fantastic discoveries of quantum mechanics and radiation and just really, really unpacking the world in a new way that humanity had never understood before. Or earlier than that, you have Charles Darwin, who developed his theory of evolution. And there were other scientists at the time who were developing similar ideas, including famously Alfred Russel Wallace. Or in more contemporary times, this is a popular example of in the fall of 1998, there was the movie Ants and the movie A Bug's Life, which were made by very different studios, and neither studio had any idea that they were both working on a similar story. But both of them were about ant colonies that were facing challenges of survival and how they overcame those challenges. And in my own personal experience, I remember in the early 1990s, I was writing a lot of fiction. I wrote a lot of horror stories and things like that, and I was a massive Stephen King fan at the time. And I had this compulsion to write a novel about a man who was unjustly convicted of murder and locked away on death row and waiting for his execution date. And I started writing a little bit of it, but I didn't follow it through. But it wasn't long after that that Stephen King's serial novel called The Green Mile came out. And it was a very similar story to what I had had, the idea for it. Well, all these different things got me thinking that maybe there's a there. Maybe there's an underlying concept that we could come to understand. There's a quote that's often attributed to Carl Jung, but it's not something that he ever said per se that we have documentation of. It's more like a synopsis of an idea that he had. And the idea is that people don't have ideas as much as ideas have people. And that can be hard to understand because maybe this morning you woke up and you had the idea that you wanted to go get a cup of coffee, or you had the idea that you wanted to wear your blue pants instead of your brown pants, or maybe you had the idea that you were going to call your mom or whatever, and you think that you had those ideas. But that's sort of a different concept than what we're talking about. What Dr. Jung was talking about is something more along the lines of the collective subconscious. That within the collective subconscious of humanity, there are ideas that come along. And we might understand it or perceive of it as a bug's life or the theory of evolution or quantum mechanics. So let me see if I can explain it to you like this. In mathematics, for a long time, there's been a debate over whether mathematics are invented or discovered. So look at it like this. If from the beginning of the cosmos, from right at the beginning of the Big Bang, if you have one thing and then you have another thing and you put them together, now you have two things. And we, in our contemporary language, we say that 1 + 1 = 2. Now, we didn't develop that idea. We just noticed a principle and then put a sentence and develop some symbols so that we can express that idea. Or in more complicated terms, you could say that the speed of gravity is 32 feet per second squared. We didn't invent that. We discovered the principle and we measured it and we took our system of understanding and applied numbers to it. And so that we can say, gravity pulls things toward the center of the earth at 32 feet per second squared. Or going even more complex, you could look at Einstein's theory of special relativity, which most people know as E = mc squared. Now, I'm not a physicist or a mathematician, so I'm not 100% sure what that means, But what I do know is that very smart people have confirmed that that principle is true, and they've used it extensively, especially even to the point where it's in use right now to bring these messages to you. Ricky Gervais said something once in an interview with Stephen Colbert that kind of bears out my point of this idea of mathematics being a little bit both invented and discovered. So here's what he said. If we take any fiction or any holy book and destroyed it, okay, in 1,000 years' time, that wouldn't come back just as it was. But if you took every science book and every fact and destroyed them all in 1,000 years, they'd all be back, because all the same tests would be the same results. And in a way, the Bible does talk about this, because in the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon says, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already, and in the ages before us. And I think the thing that King Solomon was talking about is that there are ideas that are fundamental parts of the cosmos, that are fundamental constructs. They're fundamental things that exist and are. In fact, it talks about this in the Kabbalion, that there's nothing new, there's nothing to be invented. There's only things that will emerge once the earth, once creation is ready for it. Like the idea of the automobile, or the idea of the Bible, or the idea of computers, or smartphones, or governments, or whatever the thing is. The possibility of those things always existed throughout all of time. But it wasn't until humanity had a need for it that we brought it from the unreal to the real. And I think what Ricky is saying, that if you got rid of all of literature, you would find that 1 + 1 always equals 2. You would find that E always equals MC². If you know your Bible stories, then you would understand when I say that Abraham wouldn't always have a son named Isaac, and Isaac wouldn't always have a son named Jacob, and Jacob wouldn't always wrestle an angel, and the angel wouldn't always be overcome. But what would be true is the principles behind those stories. Maybe you've seen these talks with Jordan Peterson, where he talks about Abraham being called out on an adventure. And in the Bible stories, we know that Abraham was 80 years old. He was an older man. He'd been living in his town for a long, long time. He was probably prominent in his city, probably came from a wealthy family. But then he saw how things were going, and he felt inspired and called by God to leave behind the city with his wife and go out into the wilderness and take on a new adventure. And as Jordan Peterson talks about it, there's this thing that we have to do if we're going to change our lives. We have to be able to go forward and do something with our lives, and take the risks, and face the complications and the hardships of life in order to fully become the people that we're meant to become. And even if you got rid of all the literature, like Ricky Gervais says, yes, 1 + 1 would always equal 2, and E would always equal MC². And humans would always have to step out on their own and face their adventures, and in order to become the full person that they could become. That principle will always be there. So what does any of this have to do with God moving closer to us if we move closer to him? Or what we want is wanting us? How does all this fit together? To unpack that, we're going to talk about trees for a minute. If you're like me, when you think about trees, you probably don't do it very often. But when you do, you think of these big stately wooden things that have leaves that fall and they have to be raked up, and they have this place in our society within all of human culture. There's something about a tree. But as you come to understand trees better, you'll start to realize that there's fierce competition amongst trees. One of the ways in which trees are fiercely competitive is in the way that they spread their seeds. So if you live in an area that has maple or ash trees, and I think elm, then in the fall, you'll see those little helicopter things that are spinning to the ground. Each one of those has a little seed in it. And the tree grows them to a certain point, and then they dry, and the wind breaks them off, and then they fall, and the wind takes them away, and it spreads them far away from the tree. It can carry them hundreds of feet sometimes. Or maybe you can think of squirrels and how they are absent-minded, cute, fuzzy little critters who like to eat walnuts and acorns. And they'll take a nut from a tree when it's ready, and they'll run down and they'll bury it somewhere. And they'll do that. You'll watch them in the fall, and they're burying stuff all over the place. I'll have holes all over my yard from squirrels burying nuts in the ground. But they're doing that to save some food for later on. But they're like really absent-minded because they're squirrels, and they forget where most of the nuts are. And so by doing that, they end up planting trees all over the place. So it's a great sort of symbiotic relationship that trees have with squirrels. Or maybe you can think of apple trees or fruit trees. Like I saw a story once of some fish that live, I think it's in the Amazons, in the Amazon River, and they eat fruit when it's ripe, and they'll actually come up from the water underneath and grab the fruit and eat it, and then, scatter the seeds somewhere down the river. Or you think about apples, and apples are full of seeds, but that fruit is like, it's ripe and it's sweet and it's delicious and it's enticing to people and to deer and to all these other creatures that want to take that and eat it and then spread the seeds around. And so what you can see through that process is the way that the evolutionary process, the evolutionary drive to reproduce and carry on a species has developed these techniques for carrying seeds forward. And one of the ways that it does it is by creating a fruit that's enticing to another creature who can carry it around. My observation is that this same principle of evolution that applies to fruits that entice, creatures in to spread their seeds also applies to ideas. And what happens is that there are ideas that exist already in the quantum realm. They exist in the unreal, and they're a frequency pattern. They're a potential and a probability, and they exist in that space. And when the time has come for them to be manifested, certain people, their vibrations, they will become vibrationally aligned with that idea, and then they'll be drawn to it. In the same way that deer in the fall know that it's apple season, and they'll start going over towards where the apples grow because they know that it's time to go and do that. And so what I'd like you to understand is that sometimes when you have an idea, when you have a compulsion, when you have this thing that just won't go away, that's probably not just a passing thing. It might be the universe, the cosmos, God, however you want to call it, compelling you to go take advantage of this because it's an idea that's time has come. In the same way that I had a compulsion to write a novel that was very similar to Stephen King's Green Mile. And just happened that Stephen King was in a place and in a position and had the practice to grab that idea that was ready and make it into something real for the world. I wasn't in that place, so I couldn't bring it to fruition. The next part of this idea comes from a teaching from Jesus in the book of Matthew, verse 20, where he says, "For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Growing up in the evangelical church, we took that idea of the mustard seed to mean that if we took the gospel of Jesus and shared it with people, then they would share with others and they would share with others. In the same way, if you have like one little grain of a mustard seed and plant it, it grows a plant which creates more seeds and then more seeds and more seeds. And in that way, it sort of turns Christianity into a multi-level marketing scheme. But I think that idea, while it has some validity and some truth, completely misses the point. Let's first talk about faith. Faith is a complete belief in something. Like right now, I have complete belief in the chair that I'm sitting in that it won't crush and underneath my weight. Or when I, walk across the floor upstairs, I have complete faith that the floor will hold me. And because it's not just a belief, like I can believe that, my dog is going to always behave, but I know it's not really always going to do that. I can believe that I'm going to win a lottery today. I can convince myself and I can believe that. And I can even walk around with like an arrogance and a surety that I'm going to win the lottery. I can believe that, but that's not really true. But I'm not ever going to have faith that I'm going to win the lottery unless I get a phone call that says you won the lottery and please come get your ticket. Then I'll have faith that when I go there, the ticket's going to be there, because it's just absolute knowing. I've heard a great analogy that if you order a package from Amazon and you go down to your mail room, you go to your mailbox, you go look outside, and it's just not there, and it's not there, and it's not there. You're hoping that it's going to be there. But then maybe you get an alert on your phone that says your package has been arrived, and there's a little photograph of it. Then you know. And then there's that change in your emotion. That level of emotion is the kind of faith I believe Jesus is talking about in that passage. So what does it mean to have the faith of a mustard seed? Well, what does a mustard seed do? From our perspective, it looks like it doesn't do much. It just sits there and is a mustard seed. We can put it in the ground and it doesn't really do anything. Except that it is doing something. It is radically submitting to what it is and to what can come through it. So if you had incredible hearing and you could put your ear down to a mustard seed and listen to it, you would hear the emotions that it's feeling. You would hear the resonance that it's giving off. You would hear its vibrations. The feeling and the impression that you would get from that mustard seed is, I am a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. I am a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. I am a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. And it's 100% focus. It would have no distractions. When you think about a dog, think about a dog for a minute. And dogs, they don't have any distractions. They're dogs. And they just focus on being a dog, and they're really good at being dogs. And they're ready to go. They're ready to play. They're ready to fight. They're ready to do whatever it is that dogs do. Or like spiders. Spiders are all just ready to pounce. Like they're always on edge. They're ready to go because they're a spider. It's what they do. But as humans, we have a more complex mind. We have a more complex experience of life. And, there's a sense in which we're always human. But then we might wonder, well, do I want to live in Sheboygan or do I want to live in Madagascar? Or do I want to have blonde hair or red hair? Or do I want to eat spaghetti or salad? Or I don't know what I want to do. Like, how am I going to figure this out? Where am I going to go? Right? And there's this passage in the book of James, back in the Bible again, where it talks about being a double-minded man. So James chapter 1, verse 5 and following says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. And that double-mindedness is what I'm talking about, where the spider and the dog and the mustard seed have absolute faith, absolute knowledge in what they are. But we as humans, we can kind of waver and flounder. right? And we're not always sure what it is that we're going to do. That principle is the principle that I call the I am. That is the I am principle. Maybe you've heard Neil Donald Walsh talking about how he goes around and he says, I am that, I am that, I am that thing over there. In a sense, I understand what he's getting at, but that's still double-mindedness, because you're still not being like what you are. And if you go back to the mustard seed or an acorn or any kind of seed, what that thing is doing is it is sitting there with absolute faith saying, I am a mustard plant. It's not saying I'm a mustard seed. It's not saying I'd like to be something else. It's not saying, oh, I heard one time that dandelions are pretty cool, but my mom doesn't really want me to be a dandelion. None of that stuff is happening. It's saying, I am a mustard plant. It's not focusing on what it is currently, the way that it appears to be. It's focusing on what it is, what its destiny is, what it is put there to become. I am a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. I am a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. And whatever is in the quantum realm that moves from the unreal to the real is a vibrational alignment with that thing and starts to move through that. And that little tiny mustard seed then becomes a portal through which the unreal can become real. And this here is where the 8th Hermetic principle of care, the generative principle, this is where this starts to come into effect, because as that mustard seed continues to be there and say that, and then that becomes the care, that becomes the attention, that becomes the love that is infused in that situation and draws more from the unreal to the real. That's the principle of care that's doing that, that's drawing that through. And you could say that is, in humans, we could say that is the sacred erotic flame that women are the guardian of. And in this sense, eroticism isn't only sexuality, but it's that drawing out of the masculine into the feminine. It's a very important process that has to happen in order for anything to go from the unreal to the real. So now, how do we tie all this together? Remember, we talked about how certain ideas they're ready to come to fruition. And we talked about, seeds on trees and being able to draw them in. And we talked about how sometimes you feel a compulsion to go and do a thing. And we talked about what you wants you. And as you move toward God moves towards you. And the thing that you desire is desiring you. It's because it's calling you to it. And a lot of times you'll hear people talk about, follow my program and you can make $50K a month, or, do this amazing thing and you'll get all these Instagram followers, or, go to the gym and, get jacked, and you'll find the right girl, or, follow my program and you can find the right man, or, whatever the thing is. But all of those things are distractions. And even if you are right now thinking, well, I just feel like I'm called for something greater. I'm called for something amazing. Maybe you are. I don't know. But I can almost guarantee that somewhere down inside, there's that still small voice that's saying, I am a mustard plant. I am a mustard plant. I create mustard seeds. Just like for me, for years and years, there was that still small voice that I ignored for so long that said, I teach people theology. I teach people spirituality. I teach people Christianity. I dive deeper into things. I help people find their path. I help people find peace in their life. And that was always there within me. And it was there. It's like that was my fundamental I am. There's another saying from Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas, where he says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. I know that in our day and age, there's a temptation to want to go and do something amazing and to go be, glorious. And maybe you can be, and maybe you will be. But I'd like you to take a slightly different perspective on whatever next steps it is that you're going to take. Particularly here in the modern West, we have so many opportunities in front of us, and there are so many options and so many possibilities that it can be highly distracting from letting us do the thing that we know that we're supposed to do. And we can see all the glamorous things that can happen, and we want all the glamorous things. But pursuing those things and letting yourself get distracted and saying, well, I want to go do that. Remember I said that the mustard seed isn't saying, oh, I want to go be a dandelion, or I want to go be an oak tree, or I want to go be something else. It's saying, no, I'm a mustard plant. I make mustard seeds. Once that mustard seed does start to grow and starts to flourish, then it starts to grow leaves. And once it does that, it becomes an entire ecosystem. And it gets to blow in the breeze, and it gets to be a home for spiders, and it gets to be a home for birds, and it gets to produce beautiful flowers that get pollinated by the bees. And then, like other seeds of it will go on and do like amazing things, and it gets to like completely flourish and do really, really fantastic things in the world. But if the mustard seed sat there and saying, well, I am a mustard plant, but I'm not sprouting flowers yet, it's not going to get anywhere. If it said, yeah, I'm a mustard seed, but I'm not growing any seeds yet, it's not going to get anywhere. It has to focus on what it is, and it has to keep being what it is, and it cannot get distracted from what it is. It has to take that I am principle, not in the way that Neil Donald Walsh says, where you're looking at the stairs and saying, I am the stairs, or I am the plant, or I am the cat. I mean, there's a sense in which the I am, the mind, from the first Hermetic principle, the mind is all is mind. Then yes, there's a sense that there's the I am within all those things. And you are a manifestation of the I am. But if you're going to use that principle in your life to change your life, you have to stay focused. You have to say, I am a podcaster. I am an electrician. I am a stay-at-home mom. I am a husband. And once you do that, that's what Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Thomas. That's bringing forth what is within you. And if you don't, then it'll rot in there. And it'll just like fester, and you just feel depressed and discouraged. Like you're not really doing anything with your life. You're not becoming the person that you can be. And maybe it's because you're focusing too far down the road. Maybe you feel called to be a pastor of a church, and you're focusing on, the tax structures and who your assistant pastors are going to be, and, what songs you're going to sing, and who's going to be your music leader. Don't focus on those things. Just focus on being, I am a pastor. Maybe you want to be a physician, and you're worried about what hospital am I going to work at, and who's going to be the nurse, and what kind of medical malpractice insurance am I going to have. Don't worry about those things. Just focus on being a doctor. Say, I am a doctor. I heal people. I'm a doctor. I heal people. Just focus on that, the one thing. And this means some sacrifice, because there are many fascinating things in the world. There's a lot of things in the world that I have done that I would love to do. And I've tried to do them, but I've never been able to do them well until I started to understand this principle. And now I understand that I'm a podcaster, and I bring these ideas to people, and I put them out into the world. And eventually that means I'll be afforded opportunities to maybe go on vacations, or maybe take big bike rides, or maybe like do all these sorts of things. And I'll have a whole different level of freedom that I never experienced before, because I never took that thing that was inside of me and let it flourish and become what it was meant to be. So to wrap it up, what you want wants you. It's calling you, and you can feel it. You can feel it inside. It's calling you to go and be that. And it may not be something spectacular. It could be something that seems mundane, but it could turn into something spectacular. And if nothing else, it'll bring you peace in your life. and that pit in your stomach will go away. And you'll be able to know that you're living your life, your best life. And maybe it's not a life that they would, Ford would try to sell Broncos, using your life. Who knows? But maybe it is deeply satisfying to you. Maybe it brings you joy. Maybe it brings you fulfillment. Maybe it brings you community. And that sounds pretty awesome to me. I hope you found this helpful. Please do remember to like, share, and subscribe. And I will talk to you soon. Bye. Playing me out today, we've got Get Over It by Everett Almond.